Hey everybody, thought I'd make a video about how to buy a core or how to find a good core. I get a lot of questions, and in fact I get this question quite often, so I figured I would put something together here and address this. The question goes something like this: I want to build an engine, I want to build a hot rod motor, I want to find a motor to build. How do I find a good core? Well, the thing is, it's not easy to do that. So I've got a core here that we picked up, and this is it's a Ford small block, and I'm probably going to walk you through the teardown of this and show you some of the things that you need to be looking for. A couple of things about finding a core is I buy mine from an actual core supplier that dismantles vehicles and so forth, and they guarantee these things to be rebuildable. So, I mean, there is an element of risk if I spend the time to tear it down and the block happens to be junk in there or blown up or something. That's the way it goes. I mean, you're going to lose the time and the labor to do that. But at that point, then I can take the block back to the yard, the core supplier that I bought it at, and they'll give me another block, or if they can't find another block, they'll give me my money back, and I take the block back to them. So what the problem you run into is when you start buying stuff on Craigslist or out of local one ads, swap meets, things like that. I mean, you can do that, but it's a little more risky because if you buy something off of Craigslist or somewhere like that and it happens to be junk, well, you're probably not going to get your money back. They're probably just going to say, oh, tough luck, or you can't even get a hold of the guy again, or whatever. So it's a little bit risky to do it that. I do that sometimes, but there's a couple of things that I look for. One of the things you want to make sure that you look really close at when you go to buy an engine like this, if it's on Craigslist or wherever it's at, one of the main things that you need to look for is, was the engine sitting outside and did it get full of rainwater? Because if the intake or any of these areas are exposed to the weather and the thing gets full of water, there's probably a 95% chance that that block is junk if it's sat for any length of time, because water gets down in the cylinders and it just eats through the cylinders and rusts everything out. One of the other things you need to do is you want to put a breaker bar or something. You need to have some way to turn the engine, and you want to make sure that the engine rotates before you buy it. If the engine is locked up or it doesn't rotate, that's a sign that there's probably a pretty serious internal problem. It could be the cylinders could be rusted into place, and by the time a piston gets rusted into place in the cylinder because of corrosion and rust, the cylinders are probably destroyed. So I'm going to walk you through a few things on this core. So if you're a Ford fan, this is a 5-liter V8 out of an 88 F-150. Now, the cool thing about some of these small blocks is, a lot of people don't realize this. This, yes, has emission control stuff all over it, but once we get down below all that, you can actually build this motor and put it in your hot rod, and you don't have to run all this emission stuff on it. You can put a set of headers on it, you can put a 4-barrel intake on it, or you can use the fuel injection intake if you want to, because some people want fuel injection, and that's fine. I'm not against fuel injection, but a lot of times people think, well, that's a fuel injected engine, or that's a smog engine, that's not any good for a hot rod. That's actually not true. You can actually build the basic block itself, and intake and head configuration really hasn't changed on these things since like 1965. I mean, there's subtle changes here as far as different pulley setups and timing chain covers and all that, but all the stuff from the early model engines is pretty much compatible with these. One of the things you do have to watch out for on Fords is the fact that Ford makes a lot of changes to their stuff like every couple of years, and there's a lot of different water pump offsets and pulley location offsets, and there's different weighted balancers. There's a 28 ounce and a 50 ounce, so all of that stuff has to be taken into consideration. But for the most part, you can literally, in fact, we're going to take this motor here and you look at it and it's like, oh my gosh, it's got all this emission stuff on it, it's fuel injected, you know, it's from a late model, or a later model truck, not late, it's an 88. To me, 88 is late model. When I talk about something that's old or classic, I'm thinking 60s, early 70s. So, you know, I know some of you guys watching this, when I say 88 is late model, you're like, man, I wasn't even born in 88. How was that late model? Well, if it's got fuel injection and emission controls on it, at least a lot of emission controls, like they did in the 80s, to me, that's a later model motor. And a lot of that stuff, we'll just throw it away. We're not even going to use it. So let's get into this. I'm going to walk you through. I'm going to walk you through the teardown. I think I'll do a quick tutorial on how to tear this thing apart, disassemble it, and what to look for. Some of the things that you need to keep. There's a lot of stuff on here that you don't need to keep because, like I said, this is going in a mid-60s Mustang, and it's going to be a real simple motor. It's going to have a single 4-barrel intake manifold. It's going to have headers on it. It's going to have a, you know, just a HEI type distributor up here, or MSD, I'm not sure. So it's basically going to be a very simplified version of this motor. And a lot of this stuff, now you don't want to throw everything away. Like this manifold, we're not going to use this, but that's a good manifold. I mean, you can, somebody will, if you have one of these, somebody will buy it from you. It's not, you know, it's not a real trick high performance intake, but it is a fuel injection setup. And for a stock or mild motor for the street or for a pickup truck, this actually works pretty good. It's kind of big and bulky and ugly, but it does work. And so that's something you might want to consider. Some of this stuff you probably want to keep, and maybe you can throw it on Craigslist and try to sell it and make a few bucks to offset your cost. As far as cost goes on cores, man, I'll tell you what, some of this stuff is way overpriced. I see cores like this. This is just, you know, it rotates. It's out of a truck that was clapped out or wrecked or whatever, and they pulled it out and sold it. I pay $150 for these. You see motors like this on Craigslist for like $600 or $700. Don't buy those engines. That is way, way, way too much for a core. You shouldn't be paying any more than probably $200 for a core like this, complete. So I see these people, they got a set of heads on there that are used. They want $200-300 for them on Craigslist, or an engine like this, you know, $600. Come on, man. Those motors aren't worth that much. These things are a dime a dozen. You can find them anywhere. So my rule of thumb is I never pay more than $150 for a core. I always have enough cores. I always have plenty. I'm constantly scouring, you know, the one ads. I'm constantly got feelers out to my core suppliers, and I have an agreement with them. I pay $150 for cores. You know, and people get offended. You call them up and you say, hey, you know that motor you want $600 for on Craigslist? You know, I'll give you $150. I'll give you $175. You know, and they get all butthurt about that, and they're like, oh, this is the greatest motor ever. You know, this thing's worth way more than that. No, it's not. The core value for an older small block Ford is $150. I don't care what anybody says. These guys that are selling stuff on Craigslist, they think their stuff is way more valuable than it actually is. Don't pay that kind of money. Shop around until you find one. And you guys that are overpricing that stuff on Craigslist, whatever. I guess it drives the value you know, the industry up. But the fact of the matter is that if you pay more than $150 to $200 for a core, you're getting ripped off. They're not worth that much. So go around and try to make a deal with some of the core yards, the core suppliers, and you can get stuff like this for $150 to $200 all day long, and it's guaranteed rebuildable. All right.
So just to add this in here, this is another core that I picked up today. This is it's out of a late 90s Ford Explorer. Again, $150. The guy wanted $400 for this on Craigslist. And the nice thing about this is, if you look at it, some of these Explorer engines, in fact a lot of them, actually came off of GT40. They had the GT40 heads on them. So if you look at these lines here, what that tells me is these are GT40 heads. So it never hurts to offer them money, because I was looking or browsing through Craigslist, and he wanted $400 for this, and I ended up getting it for $150 just because I called him and happened to offer him. So you'll get a lot of guys, when you offer them $150, they just scoff at you or get upset or whatever, but there's a percentage of these guys that need money, and they'll take $150 for these things. So this is a 5-liter Ford V8 with a fuel injection intake and GT40 heads. It's just a core, but it does spin, and it's should be rebuildable. It wasn't knocking or anything. So keep in mind that $150 price tag is what you should be shooting for on a core.